heavy in the sky, a luminous silver eye gazing down upon the secluded clearing deep within Black Hollow Forest. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches tangled as if whispering secrets among themselves. A bonfire crackled at the centre of the grove, its flames licking upward, casting flickering shadows against the surrounding darkness. Around the fire stood the members of the Full Moon Society, a gathering of outcasts who met once a month beneath the light of the full moon. They were not werewolves, not truly, but each believed, or desperately wanted to believe, that the beast lay within them, lurking beneath their skin, waiting for the right moment to break free. They donned shredded clothes, smeared their faces with dirt, and howled into the night, seeking solace in the illusion they had built for themselves. This night, like all others, was an escape, a momentary shedding of the cruel reality that bound them in their everyday lives. Among them stood 4 figures, each with their own burden, each with their own story. 1. Victor Redclaw Dane, once a respected professor of anthropology. Victor had lost everything after his obsession with ancient werewolf folklore spiraled into madness. His colleagues ridiculed him, his university dismissed him, and his wife left with their son. Alone and disgraced, he found solace in the Full Moon Society. His mind, fractured and raw, convinced him that the legends held truth. He had begun scratching at his own arms, believing his claws were just beneath the surface, waiting to emerge. He spoke in low growls, his once eloquent voice reduced to guttural tones, and though the others humoured him, they could see the pain behind his amber eyes. 2. Celeste Luna Halloway. Celeste had spent most of her life on the fringes of society, abandoned as a child, shuffled through foster homes, never quite belonging anywhere. She claimed to have been bitten by a wolf during a childhood camping trip, a wound that never quite healed in her mind. She swore she felt the transformation each full moon, a fire in her bones, a hunger in her belly. She was the heart of the group, the one who convinced others that they were not broken, but chosen. But when the moon waned and the act faded, she was just another lost soul, clinging to a fantasy that made the loneliness more bearable. 3. Daniel Fang Mercer. A former soldier haunted by war, Daniel struggled with the ghosts of his past. The battlefield had taken pieces of him, both physically and mentally. The society gave him something war never could: control. Here, he was not a broken veteran. He was a predator, powerful and unshackled. He painted his face with streaks of blood from raw meat, his hands always twitching as if remembering the recoil of a rifle. He was the most dangerous of them all, not because he believed in the beast within, but because he wanted it to be real. He needed it to be real. 4. Evelyn Silver Eyes Moore. A quiet woman with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed too large for her gaunt face. Evelyn had been a victim of relentless bullying, mocked for her odd habits and fascination with the occult. She claimed to have visions during the full moon, glimpses of another life where she ran with a pack beneath the endless sky. She spoke of dreams that felt more like memories, memories of hunting, of tasting blood, of feeling the wind against her fur. The others respected her for her wisdom, even if she often seemed half lost in her own mind. To Evelyn, the society was not just an escape, it was a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. As the fire roared higher, the group stood in a circle, lifting their faces to the sky, their voices rising in unison, howling into the night. It was an unspoken agreement. For these few hours, they would let the illusion consume them, let the world beyond the trees fade into nothingness. But something was different this time. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a scent unfamiliar yet primal. The forest, once so welcoming, seemed to press inward. A silence settled over the group, a feeling they could not explain creeping into their bones. For the first time in their long charade, something stirred in the darkness beyond the firelight. And for the first time, The howls they heard in response were not their own. The fire had burned low, its embers glowing faintly in the chill of the night air. The echoes of their howls had long faded, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the forest. One by one, the members of the Full Moon Society realized what they had known deep down all along. Nothing had happened. The change had not come. The beast within remained caged, silent, indifferent to their cries. Celeste, ever the believer, wiped soot from her hands and gave them all a hopeful smile. "It wasn't the right time," she whispered, her voice carrying the same conviction it always did. "Next month, the moon will call us then." The others nodded, some muttering their farewells before fading into the night, each heading their separate ways. The fantasy was over, and reality was waiting for them beyond the trees. Victor, Redclaw Dane. The clatter of keys against his door echoed in the empty apartment. Victor stepped inside, his once grand study now a chaotic mess of books, papers, and half-burned candles from old rituals that had never yielded results. The walls were lined with notes about lycanthropy, folklore, and the scientific impossibility of transformation. Yet he still believed. He sighed, pulling off his tattered coat, revealing the patched elbows of his once professional blazer. The life of a scholar had abandoned him long ago. Now he spent his days in a local bookstore, forced to endure the pitying stares of former students who came in to browse. Some recognized him and asked if he was okay, while others whispered behind his back, mocking the once great Professor Dane who had traded academia for madness. He ran his fingers over his arms, pressing at the skin, willing the claws to emerge. Nothing. As always, nothing. Celeste Luna Halloway, the flickering neon sign of the all-night diner, buzzed above her as Celeste tied her apron around her waist. The Full Moon Society made her feel strong, like she belonged, but here, under the artificial lights and the weight of reality, she was just another nobody. "Order up, Luna," her manager barked. He always called her that in a mocking tone, knowing how much she hated her real name being twisted into a joke. She swallowed her frustration, forcing a smile as she grabbed the plates. The customers never saw her. To them, she was just a faceless server, someone to bring their coffee and disappear. Her co-workers weren't much better. They whispered about how she always smelled like the woods, about her weird hobbies. One of them, a bleach blonde girl named Amber, smirked as Celeste walked past. "How was your big bad wolf meeting? Find any real werewolves yet?" Laughter. Celeste gripped the plates tighter, her knuckles white. "One day, you'll see," she muttered under her breath, but they were already onto something else, laughing at some other poor soul. She only had to make it to next month. Then it would all make sense. Then the transformation would come. Daniel Fang Mercer. The apartment was too quiet. Daniel sat on the edge of his couch, staring at the darkened screen of his television. His phone buzzed. Another message from his former squad mates. Another invitation to get drinks. Another night of pretending everything was fine. He ignored it. He couldn't talk to them. They didn't understand. The Full Moon Society was the only place where he felt something close to peace. In war, he had been part of a pack, a brotherhood. But here, in the city, he was nothing. Just another ex-soldier with too many scars and too many memories. The nightmares were getting worse. The faces of the dead haunted him, whispering in his ear, reminding him of things he could never take back. The beast inside him, if it was real, if it ever awoke, wouldn't that mean he was meant for something more? That all the killing, all the pain, had a purpose? But the moon had not answered him, not tonight. He clenched his fists, his body trembling. "Next month," he whispered. "Next month, I'll be free." Evelyn Silver Eyes Moore, Evelyn sat in her grandmother's house, the only place that still felt safe. The old woman barely noticed her, lost in the haze of age and medication. "Why don't you ever bring friends home?" her grandmother asked, her voice weak. "You used to have friends, didn't you?" Evelyn didn't answer. There was no point. People didn't understand her. They never had. She had spent years being mocked, at school, at work, even in her own family. The whispers of witch and freak still clung to her, even now, years later. But the society was different. They listened, they believed, and in their presence, she felt like she belonged. She looked out the window, up at the dimming moon. If she had been born in another time, another place, she would have been a seer, a priestess, a huntress. But in this world, she was nothing. "Next month," she whispered to the shadows. "The moon will awaken me next month." They all waited. They all endured. The full moon society was all they had. It was the only thing holding them together, the only thing that kept them from collapsing beneath the weight of their miserable, broken lives. Next month, they told themselves. The next full moon, that would be the one. It had to be. The world moved as it always did, oblivious to the pain of the lost, the forgotten, the ones who did not belong. The members of the Full Moon Society trudged through their mundane lives, waiting for the next meeting, for the next full moon, for something, anything, to change. And then, one by one, they met him. Victor, Redclaw Dane, the library. Victor sat hunched in a dim corner of the city library, flipping absently through an old book on folklore, his mind dull and unfocused. His colleagues, his students, his entire past felt like a cruel joke now. What had he become? "That one's an old favourite of mine," a deep voice rumbled. Victor looked up to see an elderly man standing before him, leaning on an ornate cane topped with the carved head of a snarling wolf. His beard was thick, grey-streaked, the hair on his chin growing in a way that almost seemed lupine. His eyes, sharp and golden in the dim light, studied Victor with something close to understanding. "Not many still search for the truth in old pages," the man continued, pulling a chair close without invitation. "You believe in it, don't you? In the hidden world?" Victor's fingers tightened around the book's edges. "And if I do?" The old man chuckled. "Then you are not as lost as you think." There was something about him, an aura of wisdom, of knowing. Victor found himself listening as the man spoke of legends, of forgotten truths, of things scholars dismissed, but dreamers still chased. By the time their conversation ended, Victor felt a spark within him that had long since faded. As the old man stood, ready to leave, Victor spoke. "We meet once a month, a group of us. You'd fit right in." The man smiled, tapping his cane against the floor. "I'd be honored." Celeste Luna Halloway, the diner. The diner was empty, save for a lone customer in the corner, a man nursing a cup of coffee, his wolf-head cane resting against the counter beside him. Celeste hadn't noticed him come in. He was just there. She moved behind the counter, her shift dragging, her thoughts elsewhere. It wasn't until she turned that she found the man watching her, his golden eyes glinting in the neon light. "Long night?" he asked. His voice was deep but warm, like a grandfather telling bedtime stories. "They always are," she muttered, refilling his coffee without thinking. "And yet, you wait for something more." He tilted his head, studying her the way no one ever had. "You believe in the moon's call, don't you? In the hunger beneath the skin?" Celeste nearly dropped the pot. I don't know what you mean." He chuckled, tapping his cane against the counter. "Oh, but you do. I see it in you. The longing, the ache. You are waiting for something to awaken, something that has been sleeping far too long." Her breath hitched. "Who are you?" A wanderer, a believer like you." He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Tell me, Celeste, what will you do when the moon finally answers?" She had no words, only a wild heartbeat and a feeling, deep in her gut, that she needed to hear more. "There's a group of us," she found herself saying. "People who understand. We meet every full moon." He smiled. "And perhaps it's time I find a pack." Daniel Fang Mercer, the bus stop. The wind was sharp, biting through Daniel's jacket as he stood at the bus stop, his mind empty, his body aching from a night of poor sleep. The city lights buzzed overhead, the streets wet with a recent rain. Waiting for something. Daniel turned to see an old man leaning on a wolf-head cane, his beard thick and wild. There was something about him, something that made Daniel feel oddly at ease. "A ride home," Daniel said, rubbing his hands together. "Not that I'm in a hurry to get there." The man nodded knowingly. "Home isn't always where we belong. Sometimes we find family elsewhere." Daniel smirked. "You sound like you know something about that." "I know many things." The man studied him for a moment before tapping his cane against the pavement. "You have the look of a soldier, someone who has fought battles no one else sees, someone who still fights them." Daniel's smirk faded. "Who are you?" The man gave a small, wolfish grin. "Someone who understands." The words settled deep in Daniel's chest, heavy but comforting. They spoke for only a few minutes, but somehow it felt like a conversation that had been waiting to happen. When the bus finally pulled up, Daniel hesitated. "There's a group of us," he said, surprising himself. "People like us. We meet once a month." The man's smile deepened. "Then I'll be seeing you soon." Evelyn ran her fingers across the spine of the old tomes, inhaling the scent of parchment and dust. The bookshop was nearly empty, save for an old man in the corner, flipping through an ancient-looking text. She wouldn't have paid him much mind if not for the cane, the wolf's head, intricately carved, its eyes almost glowing in the dim light. And then, as if sensing her gaze, the man looked up. "Searching for something?" he asked. Evelyn hesitated. "A book?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "Something more than that. Something deeper." Her throat tightened. "And what would you know about that?" The old man smiled, closing his book with a quiet thump. "I know the feeling of being an outcast, of knowing something others refuse to see, of hearing the call of something ancient." She didn't respond, but she didn't walk away either. She listened as he spoke, about history, about myths, about the nature of the beast within. His knowledge was endless, his voice soothing yet thrilling, filling her with something she hadn't felt in a long time, belief. Before he left, she made him an offer. "There's a place for people like us. We meet under the full moon." He gave her a slow nod, his golden eyes twinkling. "Then it seems I have finally found my pack." One by one, they had met him, and one by one they had invited him in. None of them questioned why. None of them thought to doubt him. Because the truth was, something about him made them feel whole. And for the first time, they weren't just waiting for the full moon. They were waiting for him. The streets were empty. Celeste pulled her jacket tighter around herself as she walked, the cool night air biting against her skin. The diner had finally closed, the neon sign flickering as she locked the door behind her and started her way home. Midnight was a lonely hour, and the world around her seemed to hold its breath. No cars, no footsteps, just the occasional hum of a street lamp and the distant howl of the wind. Then she heard it. Footsteps. At first, she thought she was imagining things, the paranoia of being alone on an empty street, but then she heard them again, slow, deliberate, trailing her from behind. She picked up her pace. The footsteps did too. A chill ran through her as she dared a glance over her shoulder. Two figures, lurking in the shadows of the alleyway, began to step out under the flickering streetlight. Their faces were obscured, but she could see the lazy, unsteady sway of their movements. Drunk. "Hey there," one of them called, voice slurred and full of something sinister. "Feeling lonely tonight?" The other chuckled. "Yeah, we can help with that." Celeste's heart pounded. She turned back and walked faster. "Hey, no need to be rude. We just want to talk," one of them sneered. She moved even quicker. Then she heard their footsteps speed up. Panic surged through her, and she broke into a run. The quiet night air was suddenly filled with the pounding of feet, the sound of them chasing her, closing in. She could hear them laughing, calling out to her, telling her to stop running. She didn't. A sharp tug on her arm sent her crashing to the pavement. Celeste gasped, scrambling to push herself up, but rough hands grabbed at her shoulders, pinning her down. The stink of alcohol filled her nostrils as one of them leaned in, grinning. "No need to be scared, little girl," he said, voice sickly sweet. "We won't hurt you much." The other grabbed at her jacket, pulling it open. "Just relax." Celeste's mind screamed. She kicked and thrashed, but they were stronger. "Please," she pleaded with the night, with the moon, with the beast she so desperately believed in. She prayed to the wolf. And the wolf answered. A blur of motion, a rush of wind, a deep, guttural growl. Then the weight of the men was gone. She gasped, rolling onto her side, watching in disbelief as the two figures were sent flying backward, as if struck by an unseen force. They hit the brick wall hard, their bodies crumpling to the ground before scrambling to their feet in sheer terror. A shadow moved in the dim alley, something too fast, too fluid to be human. The two men let out screams that barely sounded human, backing away, eyes wide with horror. "Run!" one of them shrieked, voice cracking. "Run!" They turned and bolted, stumbling over each other in their desperation to escape. Celeste lay frozen on the ground, breath ragged, heart hammering against her ribs. And then, just before the world tilted into darkness, she saw it. A figure, standing at the edge of the alley. Not a man, not a beast, a wolf. Its eyes glowed, golden and ancient. Watching her with something that felt almost like recognition. Then everything faded to black. She awoke to the beeping of a heart monitor. The hospital room was dim, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling her nose. A dull ache pulsed at her temple, and when she reached up, she felt the rough texture of a bandage against her skin. A nurse walked in, glancing at her chart. "Good to see you awake. You took a nasty bump." Celeste swallowed, her throat dry. What happened?" The nurse gave her a reassuring smile. "A man brought you in. Said he found you unconscious in the alley. Then he left before we could get his name." Celeste's breath caught. She turned her head slowly toward the window, where the night still lingered. The full moon hung high, bathing the city in silver light. She didn't need to ask who had saved her. She already knew. The wolf was real. Daniel sat in the dim glow of his small apartment, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the table beside him. The room was quiet, except for the distant hum of the city beyond the window, but inside his head, it was anything but silent. The war had never ended for him. The ghosts of fallen brothers whispered in his ears, their voices blending into the static of memories he wished he could erase. Tonight was the night he would finally silence them. His hands were steady as he reached for the lockbox in the cupboard. The weight of the gun in his palm was familiar, a comfort he had held too many times before. He exhaled, pressing the barrel to his temple, closing his eyes. Then he heard it. A voice, deep, resonant, ancient. Not yet. His eyes snapped open, heart hammering. The room was the same, empty, still, except for one thing. In the farthest corner, just beyond the reach of the light, a pair of golden eyes watched him. They did not blink. They did not move. They simply held him there, as if rooting him to existence. "You are stronger than this." His breath came ragged, his pulse wild. The gun felt heavier now, as though something unseen pressed against his hand, forcing him to lower it. He couldn't look away from the eyes. They were not human. They were something else, something knowing. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone. The dark corner was just a corner again. The gun slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor. He was still alive, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel completely alone. Victor walked the city streets in a daze, the cold air biting through his thin coat. The meeting with the stranger at the library had stirred something in him, but doubt still gnawed at his mind. He had dedicated his life to studying myths, but deep down, he had never been certain if any of it was real. Tonight, he needed answers. His thoughts were so heavy, he barely noticed the traffic light had changed. The blaring of a horn snapped him back to reality. Headlights. The car was too close. There was no time to move. A force, strong, unseen, gripped him by the back of his coat and yanked him backward onto the sidewalk, just as the vehicle roared past. The rush of wind sent his papers flying, but he was alive. He twisted around, heart racing, expecting to see someone, anyone, who had pulled him to safety. There was no one, only the distant outline of an alleyway, and in its depths, two golden eyes stared at him, gleaming in the darkness. Victor swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had spent years searching for proof that the legends were real. He had just found it. Evelyn walked home, her arms wrapped around herself, bracing against the cold. The night was quiet, but her mind was loud, replaying words that had been carved into her since childhood. Freak, witch, weirdo. The names they had called her in school never truly faded. Even now, even as an adult, she still felt the weight of them. It wasn't just strangers either. Her ex-boyfriend had been the worst. He had called her crazy, mocked her beliefs, twisted her love of the old stories into something shameful. He had drained her confidence, stripped her bare, until she barely recognized herself. And now, after months of silence, he was back. The messages had started small. Apologies, regrets, things she had wanted to hear years ago. But then they became darker, angry, threatening. She had ignored them, blocked his number, but it didn't stop the feeling that he was watching her. Tonight, that feeling was unbearable. She glanced over her shoulder. The street was empty, yet her skin prickled, her instincts screaming that she was not alone. A shadow moved ahead, a figure leaning against a lamppost. Her stomach twisted as she recognized him. He grinned. "Hey, Evie. Long time no see." She turned on her heel and walked faster. "Come on, don't be like that. You think you're better than me now? Just 'cause you've got some little freak club?" He laughed, stepping into stride behind her. "You still owe me a conversation." She didn't answer, didn't stop. She could hear him speeding up. She knew him, knew his temper. Then just as he reached for her, something else moved. A deep, rumbling growl cut through the air. Evelyn froze. Her ex did too. His hand hovered inches from her shoulder, his expression shifting from smug amusement to outright terror. From the alley beside them, two golden eyes glowed in the dark. The growl grew deeper, more guttural, and then something huge shifted in the shadows. Her ex stumbled backward, hands up. I didn't mean nothing. Just talking." His voice cracked. "Jesus, what the hell is—" A snarl, a step forward. That was all it took. He turned and ran, his curses and panicked footsteps swallowed by the night. Evelyn stood frozen, staring into the alleyway. The eyes remained on her, watching, studying, not threatening, just there. For the first time in her life, She didn't feel weak. She wasn't alone. Each of them, in the span of a single night, had been touched by something beyond understanding, something that should not exist, something that had been watching them, protecting them. The Full Moon Society had always been a gathering of outcasts, of people who longed to believe in the impossible. Now the impossible had come to them, and everything was about to change. The night of the full moon had arrived. One by one, they made their way through the thick woods to the secluded clearing where the Full Moon Society always gathered. The fire had already been lit, its orange glow flickering against the looming trees, casting long, dancing shadows. Victor was the first to arrive, rubbing his hands together against the cold as he took his usual place near the fire. Soon after, Daniel appeared, silent and brooding, followed by Evelyn, her hood drawn up, hiding most of her face. Celeste came last, brushing stray strands of hair from her face, her breath fogging in the cold air. They sat in their usual spots, an unspoken tradition. Then Victor spoke first. I invited someone. His voice wavered slightly, hesitant. Celeste's head snapped up. You did? Daniel let out a dry chuckle. Funny. So did I. Evelyn looked up from the fire, her expression unreadable. Me too. Celeste's stomach twisted. Wait. I also... She stopped, looking around at their stunned faces. Silence fell over the group. They exchanged uncertain glances, realizing what had just happened. They had all invited the same man. This is freaky, Daniel muttered, shaking his head. It's just a coincidence. Victor tried to rationalize. Or maybe he knew we'd all be here and just humoured us. Maybe, Celeste whispered, though doubt crept into her voice. Minutes passed, but nothing happened. The moon hung high above them, full and bright, casting silver beams through the trees. They began their usual rituals, the chants, the howls, the prayers to the beast within. They called upon the change, willed it to take hold. But as always, nothing happened. The fire crackled, the trees rustled in the wind, and the cold crept deeper into their bones. Eventually, Celeste sighed, rubbing her arms. It's getting late. We should go? Evelyn nodded, pulling her hood tighter around her face. Next time. Maybe. Celeste forced a smile. Yeah, maybe next time. The moon just wasn't ready for us yet. The others nodded, readying to leave, when a voice rang out from the darkness. Finishing so soon? They all froze. A shadow emerged from the trees, walking with an effortless grace. The firelight glinted off the wolf's head cane as the old man stepped into the clearing, his beard illuminated in the flickering glow. His golden eyes gleamed as he surveyed them, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. I was beginning to think I'd been forgotten, he said, his voice smooth, knowing. The four of them stood frozen, staring at him. None of them spoke, but something primal, something deep within, flared to life inside them. It was not fear. It was joy, pure, unexplainable joy. The feeling was foreign, like a long-lost part of themselves had returned. They had only just met this man, yet somehow his presence felt right. Thank you for inviting me to your society, the old man said, stepping closer. It is an honor to be among such believers. They nodded in unison, not because they had to, but because it felt natural. And then, without a word, without a command, they all sat before him, cross-legged, eyes locked onto him. There was no hesitation, no question. It was as if their bodies instinctively knew their place. The old man's smile widened slightly as he rested his hands on his cane. He looked at them with something beyond amusement, beyond curiosity. He looked at them like a teacher greeting his students, like a father welcoming his children home. Then he spoke. Now, let's get started. The fire crackled, sending embers swirling into the night air. The old man sat before them, his wolf's head cane resting against his knee, his golden eyes reflecting the flames. The four of them, Victor, Celeste, Daniel, and Evelyn, watched him in silence, waiting, their breath shallow, their hearts pounding. "I have watched you for some time," the old man said, his voice deep and measured. "I have seen your pain, your struggles. I have seen how the world has rejected you, and I have watched over you." His eyes lingered on each of them, and suddenly, the memories rushed back. The force that pulled Victor back from the speeding car, the glowing eyes that stopped Daniel from pulling the trigger, the shadow that sent Evelyn's tormentor fleeing in terror, the blur of motion that saved Celeste in the alley. "It was me," the old man said, his voice soft but undeniable. "Each time you called out to the moon, each time you longed for a sign, I was there." A shiver ran through them, the weight of his words settling over them like a thick fog. "You have all shown your loyalty to the moon. Your faith has not gone unnoticed," he continued. "It has been a long while since I have seen such devotion in mortals. I must say, I am pleased." His lips curled into a slight smile, but it was unreadable, somewhere between satisfaction and something far older, something beyond their understanding. Then his expression darkened. "Now, it is time for the ultimate choice." The fire burned hotter. The air around them grew thick, charged with unseen energy. "I offer you the chance to join me in nature, beyond this world, beyond this realm, but only 3 of you may come with me. 1 of you must remain behind, to continue here, to live among the mortals." A stunned silence filled the clearing. Victor was the first to react. He slowly knelt, bowing his head deeply, his hands pressing against the cold earth. "I know you," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I have read of you, studied the old ways. I have chased your legend my whole life." The old man's eyes flickered. He lifted his chin slightly. "Do not bow. Nature bows before no one. It simply is." Victor swallowed hard and nodded, rising to his feet. The old man looked over them again. "What say you?" "Victor, the devoted scholar." Victor's hands trembled as he spoke. "I do not belong here. I have never belonged here." His voice was raw, thick with emotion. "I was a man of knowledge once, a man of reason, but that world cast me out the moment I spoke of the truth. They called me mad. They took everything from me. But I know there is more. I have always known. If you will have me, I will go with you." Celeste, the dreamer. Celeste wiped at her eyes, shaking her head. "I have spent my entire life feeling like I was waiting for something, like the world was unfinished, like I wasn't meant to be here. The full moon society was all I had, but even then, it wasn't enough. I don't want to wait anymore. I want to be where I belong. I will go with you." "Daniel, the broken soldier." Daniel exhaled through his nose, jaw tight. "This world..." He clenched his fists, then relaxed them. "It was never meant for people like me. I was made for war. The fight is all I've ever known, and now, without it, I am nothing. I thought death would be my way out. But if there is another way, if there is purpose beyond this place, then I will take it. I will go with you." "Evelyn, the survivor." Evelyn's breath hitched. She looked at the others, at the conviction in their eyes, at the certainty in their voices. Then she looked at the fire, at the flickering flames licking the cold air. "I thought I wanted to leave this world," she admitted. "I thought I was done with it. The cruelty, the loneliness, the feeling of never quite belonging." She closed her eyes for a moment. "But someone once told me that nature does not bow to anyone, that it simply is, And I think maybe I'm still finding what I am. Maybe I still have something left to do here." The old man nodded slowly, as if he had known all along what their choices would be. "So it shall be," he said. The fire roared, and the night held its breath. Something ancient stirred in the wind. The choice had been made. The fire flared, its flames stretching higher, as if in reverence. The air around them thickened, charged with something ancient, something beyond their comprehension. The old man, Lysanor, exhaled, his golden eyes glowing brighter, their intensity almost unbearable. His body shifted, the very air around him warping as his form began to change. His flesh stretched, his bones cracked, his frame expanded. What had once been the body of a man was now something else, something divine. His hands became clawed, his spine elongated, his entire form towering over them like a being forged from the very essence of the moon itself. Dark fur rippled along his shoulders, his face lengthening into a powerful lupine snout. But this was no ordinary werewolf. This was Lysanor, the god of the lycan, hidden in human form, now revealed in all his immortal splendor. The sheer presence of him was overwhelming. Victor, Celeste, Daniel, and Evelyn could feel it in their bones. The call of the wild, the pulse of the moon, the raw force of nature itself. Lysanor's voice, now deeper, richer, resounded through the clearing. "I will take 3 with me, to live in my realm of peace. You will run with my pack. You will aid nature's call of the wolf. You will protect my realm. And in doing so, you will become lycan, not cursed, but blessed." The chosen 3, Victor, Celeste, and Daniel, stepped forward, their hearts racing, their bodies trembling, but not with fear, with purpose. Lysanor turned his gaze to Evelyn, his expression unreadable. "You will remain here," he said, his voice firm yet not unkind. "At the call of each moon, you shall transform. You shall know the form you have sought all your life, but your path is different from theirs." Evelyn's breath hitched. "Why?" she whispered. "Why am I the one who stays?" Lysanor studied her for a moment before speaking. "Because you are balance. The others sought escape, sought belonging. But you, Evelyn, you see the world for what it is. You understand its fragility, its need for harmony, and while my realm is one of peace, this world still needs those who walk between light and shadow. You will hold balance here, just as I hold balance in my domain." She swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling into her very soul. A shimmering portal formed behind Lysanor, swirling with light and shadow, a gateway to a world unknown. The 3 chosen ones stepped forward, each of them looking back at Evelyn for the briefest of moments. There was no sorrow in their eyes, only peace, only joy. They stepped through. Instantly, the transformation took hold. Their human forms melted away, replaced by something more, something greater. Wolves, strong, powerful, magnificent, emerged in their place, their howls blending into the wind, a sound of pure freedom. Evelyn felt it, their joy, their exhilaration. It washed over her, through her, and for the first time in her life, she felt something she had never truly known. Peace. A single tear slid down her cheek, not from sadness, but from happiness. Her only friends had finally found where they belonged. The portal shimmered once more, then closed. Lysanor turned to Evelyn, his golden eyes softer now, less imposing. "Your time will come," he told her. "One day, I will call on you to enter my realm, but until then, you will walk this world as its guardian. Others like you exist, scattered across the earth. In time, they will seek you out, drawn to your presence. You will not be alone forever." She nodded slowly, the truth of his words settling deep inside her. Lysanor stepped forward, his massive clawed hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "And when that time comes, another will find you, the one called Winter, the keeper of balance. He will come to you, to aid you, or perhaps to seek your aid. When he does, you must be ready." Evelyn inhaled sharply, feeling the weight of destiny pressing down upon her, but for the first time in her life, she did not feel burdened by it. She felt prepared. Lysanor took a step back, his form beginning to fade into the mist. His final words echoed in the clearing as he vanished. "Walk with strength, Evelyn. The moon watches over you." The world had not changed, but Evelyn had. She walked through the streets, the same streets she had walked 1,000 times before, yet everything felt different. The weight that had pressed against her for years was gone. She no longer felt out of place, no longer felt like an intruder in her own skin. There was something new inside her now, something ancient, something right, and the world felt it. People noticed her in ways they never had before. The barista at the coffee shop hesitated as he handed her drink, his eyes lingering on her as if he couldn't quite place what was different about her. You change your hair or something? You look..." He trailed off, unsure of how to finish his sentence. Evelyn only smiled, took her coffee, and walked away. At work, the usual whispers, the usual quiet judgments had faded. There was no more laughter behind her back, no sideways glances. When she spoke, people listened. When she walked into a room, conversations quieted for a moment, as if everyone could sense something about her had shifted. They didn't know what it was, but they knew. Even her reflection in the mirror had changed. It was still her. Same features, same eyes, but there was a sharpness to them now, a glint of something primal just beneath the surface. For the first time in her life, she didn't flinch from her own gaze. The night of the full moon, the clearing was silent. The fire pit, untouched. The trees loomed tall, stretching towards the sky like ancient sentinels. Evelyn stood alone, the wind whispering through the leaves, carrying the scents of the forest, the sounds of the night. She had come out of habit, even though she knew the others were gone, even though she knew the full moon society no longer existed as it once had. She had to be here, because tonight was different. The moon had not yet risen, but she felt it approaching, felt the shift in the air, the pull in her very bones. She closed her eyes. Then a soft glow touched the treetops. The first silver sliver of the moon crested the horizon. Evelyn inhaled sharply. The change began. Her breath came faster. Her heart pounded like a drum. Her skin tingled. Her fingers flexed, her nails lengthening ever so slightly. The world sharpened. Sounds, scents, everything becoming more vivid. Her mouth opened, a quiet gasp escaping her lips as a deep heat surged through her veins. Not pain, but something else, something powerful, something alive. From behind, the scene was still, the clearing empty, but for one lone figure standing in the center. Then she turned. Her eyes, no longer of their usual color, now burned red like embers. Her face, halfway through the transformation, held the unmistakable features of something no longer entirely human. The moonlight bathed her in silver, and for the first time, Evelyn knew where she was supposed to be.